Hi, I'm here to talk to you today about two of the major reading components, comprehension and oral language. First, let's talk about our major reading components. So they are comprehension, oral language, vocabulary, fluency, phonological awareness, and phonics. All of those components together allow someone to read and understand what they are reading, knowing that comprehension is the ultimate goal. So here are some questions that we are going to be answering. You are going to be learning through the tasks that I am going to have you go through. More questions, more things that we need to learn about comprehension and oral language. And finally, the last few. I would encourage you to watch this video several times to get an idea of comprehension and oral language as it applies to reading. And also be sure to read and or watch the material that I talk about through this video. So the number one thing we have to understand about comprehension is that background knowledge or schema plays a huge role in students being able to understand what they read. The chain link picture here I give you is if you think about things that we know being the silver part of the chain and new information that we're about to read or explore being the red part of the chain. We need to be able to link them together in order for the chain to be strong and for us to understand that. Robert Marzano wrote a chapter in one of his books about background knowledge and how important it is. Please read that chapter. It is listed in your reading section of the syllabus. So take a few minutes and read that chapter to further understand the importance of background knowledge and motivation and how background knowledge actually helps to motivate the student to understanding what they read. These two quotes I thought were very, very important. What seems to be critical is not the sheer amount of experience, but rather what one has been able to learn from and do with the experience. We're talking about background knowledge. And you know as well as I do as teachers that students come into our classrooms with varied amount of background knowledge. Some have just read more and been more places. Their families have taken them places. They've experienced the world either through maybe the internet or places that they've been. Those types of things really factor into being able to comprehend what a student reads. So there's a website called Reading Rockets that you're going to become very familiar with, and I would like for you to read about motivation and what the research says about that. So this is a picture of the page that you will find when you access Reading Motivation, what the research says. So let's talk about the importance of setting a purpose for learning or reading. As teachers, we know what the purpose is for a particular text that we're having a student read or even a lesson that we're teaching. And that's because we have standards. And those standards build each year. So even at the elementary level, we know where the standards are going. That's our purpose. But students don't always understand the purpose. So it's important for us to tell them the expectation of what we want them to learn at the end of the lesson or at the end of what they are reading. This is what you are supposed to leave with today, so they know whether or not they have met the mark. Setting a purpose for reading is important. We tell them what we want them to know by the time they finish reading, what they want them to know at the end of the lesson. It will help them to almost devise a roadmap in their mind so they know where they are going. That goal in mind, that purpose, is essential to the students understanding what they are learning. We also know that there is a flow of reading instruction, and I've just laid it out for you between kindergarten through the 12th grade so that you can see what each grade level is expected to master. As teachers, that's our purpose, but as students, we need to break that down into individual pieces for them. This is a blog from a teacher that talks about the difference between reading skills and reading strategies. I would encourage you to visit this blog. She has some wonderful resources for you to use. The first thing that you need to understand, basically, the difference between reading skills or reading strategies is reading skills are those things that we basically do automatically while we read, so we know we can figure out the cause and effect of something, or that the chronological order of things that happen in a book help us to understand the stories. For example, in the book Elijah of Buxton by Christopher Paul Curtis, there are some flashbacks. Chapter 1 happens, and then a flashback is basically chapter 2. Students need to understand that chronologically, chapter 2 took place before chapter 1, but the author is putting it there to help us understand how Elijah's thoughts and what he is doing basically come together. Those are reading skills, being able to sequence something in the correct order. Reading strategies are those things that help us understand that we do as we realize maybe that we're not understanding something, or to help us understand something better. So reading skills are those things that we need to know to understand or comprehend what we are reading. And there's simple things that we don't often think about while we are reading, but that if you break it down into the individual skill, it makes sense, such as cause and effect and compare and contrast. So we may need to individually teach these skills to students, and then they will use them as an application while they are reading. Here are more. Categorize and classify, and then the basic story structure, even just beginning, middle, end. As the students develop further in their schooling, they'll be able to pick out main characters, antagonist, protagonist, the plot, the rising actions in the story, the climax, all of those types of things that they need to be able to understand as they read. There's even sequence of events, noting details, which hooks to main idea. Knowing the author's viewpoint, not just why the author wrote something, but why they used a particular verbiage that they did, why they're creating this picture for you. Making generalizations, making inferences, which is sometimes very difficult for students. Making judgments about characters, and predicting outcomes. These are all reading skills. Problem solving. How did the characters problem solve? What conclusions can we draw from something we are reading? And is this fantasy or realism? Sometimes the covers of the books can tell us that, but sometimes they can't. So you've learned about reading skills. So they are those things that we use kind of automatically as good readers to help us understand a story. But reading strategies are those things that we use to help us, especially when we're having difficulty. Or how do we interpret a particular text? How do we make decisions about how things need to be interpreted? And these are reading strategies. So the reading strategies need to be taught to students as well as the reading skills because they are a way to comprehend, not an end in and of itself. So here are some reading strategies that we teach students how to do these things in order to understand. We teach them to predict, summarize, to reread if they don't understand something, maybe to underline in a text or a piece that they're allowed to do that, to be able to paraphrase or state in your own words. Ask questions of yourself as you are reading the text and then answering them. And the other things, a picture walk, taking notes, being able to think aloud, creating a visual in your mind, locate key words, or maybe use graphic organizers. These are all strategies that help students comprehend as they go along when they're reading a text. Now I want to move to talk about higher order thinking. You are going to be doing some of this learning on your own. I'm just introducing this to you right here. So there are two ways that teachers basically work with higher order thinking in the classroom. They are through Bloom's taxonomy and Webb's depth of knowledge. So I've given you a video for you to watch on how these two kind of overlap or go together. So be sure you watch that to increase your understanding. Now, Bloom's taxonomy, here it is kind of broken down, help us create meaningful experiences for our students. And really what we want to do is move kind of up on the taxonomy. So remembering and understanding are not really the higher order levels, but we want to move into application, which some don't really consider higher knowledge, but into that analyzing, evaluating, and creating. And you can see how that translates into Webb's depth of knowledge. So to learn more about Bloom's taxonomy, make sure that you watch the video that I have given for you in the resources. Also, you can watch more about Webb's depth of knowledge to help you understand how to create activities in your classroom based upon this. There's an interesting podcast that I follow. It's called The Cult of Pedagogy. And recently, there was a podcast that the owner put out entitled, "Is That Higher Order Task Really Higher Order?" And the link to that podcast is in the resources that I've given you in the syllabus. I would encourage you to listen to this because it will really make you think about sometimes the tasks that we label higher order may not really be higher order. We're asking, for instance, our students to create something, but it's based on a low level of understanding. So it's not really higher order up on the Bloom's taxonomy level. It's really just a low order task that we've given a higher order name. It's very interesting. I would encourage you to listen to that. So now let's move on to oral and written language activities and how they facilitate comprehension. So I've given you some interesting reading based upon your understanding as you have learned so far of oral and written language activities, how to create literacy-rich environments. Again, this is in your resources in the syllabus. One of the important things for you to learn on how to create oral and written language activities that help with comprehension are the components of effective oral language instruction. So there's a handout for you to read on this, but I've given them here just in 5 bullets. Students need to develop listening and speaking skills within the classroom. That would be in both whole group, small group, and also individual, such as presentation skills. You also want to teach a variety of spoken texts. You want to create a language learning environment to teach and extend vocabulary and conceptual knowledge, and to promote auditory memory. So there's a lot of detail within this document that I've given. Please refer to that in your resources. Also in your resources is a document entitled The Importance of Oral Language for Literacy. And this is an important study that was done that you need to read on how important it is to incorporate oral language into your literacy teaching. So please refer to this in the resources. Now we want to move on to how does learning syntax, semantics, pragmatics, vocabulary, and text structure impact the learning of academic language. So first of all, you have to know the difference between social and academic language. And again, I have put something in your resources for you to read. But in a nutshell, social language has to do with how we talk to our friends, and when we're not in a learning situation, how we might either talk to each other or write to each other. So it's different it should be different when you write an email to your principal or your boss than when you text a friend. Those kinds of things are kind of social activities, but you know the difference between them. Now, academic has to do with the vocabulary that's necessary to learn something in a particular language. Academic has to do with domain-specific words that you use. It's important here that you know the difference between academic language and formal language. Formal language would be using like the please, thank you, or maybe the email that you're writing to your principal or boss. You probably would not open with, hey girl, how are you? Instead, maybe, dear Dr. So-and-so. That's appropriate pragmatics, which we'll get into in a moment. That's formal language. But academic language has to do with the domain-specific words, the vocabulary that is necessary to learn that particular content or subject. So be sure to read that article that I have attached in the resources. So now let's look at syntax, semantics, pragmatics, vocabulary, and text structure. So syntax has to do with the way words are put together in sentences, and how sentences are put together to form paragraphs, and how paragraphs are put together to form text. So this can be very, very confusing, especially to our ELL students when their language syntax does not match ours, such as in the Spanish language, they put an adjective after the noun. In English, we put it before the noun. So again, that's very important that we teach syntax to our students to help them understand what they are reading. Semantic has to do with the meanings. So it could be the semantics, just vocabulary words, or figurative language, or just understanding the semantics of how an author writes in a particular way. So that's important as well. Pragmatics has to do with knowing where to use particular language. So again, depending upon what the student might read, the pragmatics may be different. So in an academic text, they're going to be very different than in a fiction text, especially maybe realistic fiction, where the language there is very culture-based. Of course, we all know that vocabulary is very important, because if students don't know vocabulary, they really cannot understand what they read. But also text structure. Sometimes teachers fail to understand the importance of teaching text structure, especially when we're teaching informational text. Knowing how that text is set up, like why are words in bold? What are the headings supposed to do? How do they direct me to find specific information in an area? What about the captions underneath the pictures? Those particular things, text structure, are very important to being able to read and comprehend in the classroom. So to go along with that, we're talking about domain-specific text. So especially if you teach areas such as in the social studies or in the sciences or even math, you know that those domain-specific texts are very difficult because of their vocabulary. I have included a video here, a glimpse into, I believe it's looks like a second grade classroom. And even though it's elementary level, we can all learn from how the teacher uses the informational texts and the demands upon those texts and how we can help our students understand. So please watch this video. This is a 5th grade video, social studies, on the reading demands of domain-specific text and what the teacher does to help the students be able to understand the textbook in a way that they can comprehend. So we also have to teach our students to self-monitor and self-correct while they are reading. And this particular workshop, it's kindergarten and it's adorable, but it has a lot of meaning. How do we teach our students to know when I'm reading a text, do I understand what I'm reading? We all have met that student where they read a text and we get to the end and we say, all right, tell me about what you read. And they say, I have no idea. We have to be able to teach our students to ask themselves questions and to be able to catch themselves, to be metacognizant and be aware that when they are reading, they don't understand. And how do I fix that? What are some self-correcting strategies? So this video will help you to understand just a little bit better. How does English language learners' linguistic and cultural backgrounds influence their comprehension? In the state of Florida, we have quite a number of ELL students, and depending upon what state or district you're in, you may as well. And it is important that we understand that ELL's linguistic and cultural backgrounds do influence their comprehension. So these 2 articles that I have put in your resources will help you to understand that. Also, there's an additional article in using the student's home language, their L1. It is extremely valuable. I will give you an example. When I was teaching 5th grade one year, I had a student who came from Puerto Rico and was in my classroom for a number of months, and he didn't seem to be improving very well, not as much as other ELL students that I had. And I was working with him on learning how to read English and how to speak English, but it just wasn't coming along. So one of the things that I did was I brought in a mentor who spoke Spanish, and I asked them to read a book with this particular student in Spanish with them, and then ask them some comprehension questions. And what I learned about the student was he basically was learning disabled in his own language, and I was trying to have him read English, you know, where he should be in the 5th grade, and it was an incredible hurdle that this child should not have had to try and jump over, because I didn't understand at the time that the home language was very, very important. So first of all, know what your student can do in their home language, because if they can't do it in their home language, they certainly can't do it in a new language that they are learning. But the home language is the most valuable resource for you to know and use when teaching English and reading to ELL students. So I've given you a basic overview of comprehension and what students need to do. Now it's time for you to dig into the resources that are in the syllabus and read and watch and take notes and learn about comprehension and oral language.